Major news out of Nintendo of America today. We are going to see Doug Bowser, the president and CEO of Nintendo of America, step down at the end of the year and be replaced by a couple of other people. NOE's head Shibata and Devin Pitchford, some like NOA marketing lead that's going to be taking over. So there's a lot of speculation as to like what this means and what's going on. Like, is this a serious thing? Like, is Doug Bowser getting fired? There's been all this speculation, and like I think the timing of it is kind of strange because the Switch 2 just came out and Bowser has only been there for 5 years. It does seem kind of sudden, but like when you take into account like everything else that's happened, I don't necessarily think there's anything weird about this, like other than like just how sudden it is. Like Bowser hasn't done anything wrong. He hasn't been like this antagonistic evil force at Nintendo. He hasn't been ruining games. Like, if anything, I was kind of praising him because, during Reggie's initial run, like we were seeing like games not getting coming out in the States. We were seeing all these excuses from developers. We were seeing like weird marketing strategies. Like, I didn't think that Bowser was nearly doing like as poor of a job as Reggie. Like, that was my opinion, but maybe like the issues with Bowser were kind of like, not something that a core fan would notice, when it comes to like, yeah, marketing structures and strategies and stuff that like doesn't really matter to me because I suppose there are some things you could complain about when it comes to like at Nintendo of America right now. Specifically, the thing that sticks out to me is like the they thems and things of that nature. I definitely have like a big problem with like the kind of person that works at Nintendo of America. So again, I think to a certain extent there should be a reasonable amount of distrust for the company, but I feel as if, the current structure is actually better than the old one because I think Nintendo has sent in Shibata to oversee what NOA is doing. He is, of course, a Japanese guy. So, an older Japanese guy. So it's my hope that we're going to see like NOA be wrangled in and all this nonsense be purged and them start hiring like from more conservative parts of the country and then like making real purges to like some of the things that have been going on there. Like there's definitely something they definitely need to like stop certain individuals from gaining more power and influence at that company. Like, again, we'll have to see if we see anything radically different, but I do think this needs to be emphasized a lot because I keep seeing like people like Grums and like JT Smash like spurging about this. Like, NOA doesn't make the games, right? They're basically just a marketing firm that publishes in North America. So they can definitely do things when it comes to like, localization and all that weird stuff. But like when it comes to actually producing the games themselves, they can't do anything. Like that's entirely up to the Japanese. And up to this point, Nintendo hasn't even had like a sniff of wokeness. At this point, it's definitely there's definitely this feeling that could change at any time, but I think because of like the change in culture and just because of how more like adamant people are at becoming anti woke, like I really think we're past peak wokeness at this point, and we're kind of like going back to more conservative America. Like, I do think we're kind of past like the worst of it, and we are going to see like culture sort of like self-correcting going forward. And I do think that does mean that a company like NOA might see a little bit more like conservative people entering it and getting more influence and like kind of pushing back against this kind of nonsense. And like I don't really see any reason to suspect that like Doug Bowser was some like beacon of conservatism because I if anything one of my problems with Bowser was that he was under his watch we did start seeing like more woke aspects being introduced into Nintendo localizations. The the choose your style thing and Animal Crossing. Like, I'm sure that like there's a very real possibility that we'll start to see gayness in Tamagotchi life and the like. Like this is definitely something that like should have been pushed back on and just not allowed. But unfortunately, it's just a cultural issue. I don't know like if we can blame Bowser for that though specifically because it's like everywhere. It's a prevalent issue. So like for me personally, like what exactly did Bowser do wrong? Like I definitely feel as if like there could have been a lot more done to like push back against wokeness. I wish Nintendo like more openly kind of opposed this kind of like this culture and was like kind of the anti-woke company. And honestly, by just staying like neutral like they have been, they kind of are by default. But I don't know. At this point, like I kind of feel like neutrality is like complicity. So like I feel like if you're neutral, if you consider yourself a centrist, you are essentially left wing. You are essentially a liberal company because you're allowing everyone else to just kind of run rampant and just do all this insane stuff. So like I don't trust centrists. I don't trust politically neutral people because like to me it just seems like you have no conviction and that you have no faith in like what you're doing. And I do think more and more that some of the things we've been seeing from Nintendo in regards like the Day and Dem stuff, what happened with Fire Emblem Shadows, like it is becoming too close to woke culture for my liking, right? Like I definitely don't want to say it's on the same level as what PlayStation is doing with like Ghost of Your Toy and stuff like that, but it's very frustrating, going into like every major Nintendo release and like everyone just screaming woke all the time. It's never actually true, but there's always this like feeling that like it could become true at a certain point, like, and again, because people are crying wolf so much, because Grums is constantly like going off on how Nintendo is doomed this time, guys. Like, when it does happen for real, when Nintendo does fall off, if it falls off, like nobody's going to believe it. And I think that's actually what's happening with Grums and with like, people screaming about censorship is that they've been doing it for so long, even back when they weren't doing anything back in like the 2012, 2014 period. Like even back in the Wii U and 3DS era, like back when they weren't doing anything, people were still like it was a common narrative at the time that Nintendo was absolutely the worst when it came to censorship and changing Japanese games. Of course, that was never true, as we learned shortly afterward when Sony started becoming notorious for censoring games. But like, you still have this very prevalent narrative that Nintendo is very censorship happy. And in fact, like you have people coming up with entire movements trying to bring back the idea back. That's basically what Operation Second Rainfall was this attempt at gaslighting people into thinking Nintendo is censoring games when in reality these games are censored on all platforms because hentai is being cracked down on everywhere. So like there's nothing really going on with Nintendo of America right now. But like I definitely would be remiss if like I were to deny the reality of like Seattle's political leanings, the people who live there, and what they would do if they had the power and influence. So I am certain that Doug Bowser and Devin Pitchford would push more woke liberal ideologies on Nintendo games if they could. But the issue with that is that like, well, is Nintendo going to allow that? Are they actively going to advocate for that? Are they actually going to like add in more progressive like narratives into games? And like I just don't really see it happening. The biggest controversies in the past couple of years with like trying to pretend like Vivian is a troon, like things like that, like they just kind of resulted in like a line change that doesn't really like amount to much. That doesn't really mean anything, especially when you understand the context of it. Like it just feels as if like they're in that stage where like all they can do is just change lines and like imply stuff and never outright say it. Like, Bridget is a really good example of that because like the developers like insisted initially that like, oh yeah, Bridget is Bridget is a true now. Bridget is totally a female. Like, yeah. And like that completely imploded like among the actual fans. People who actually like Bridget, people who actually like the character, especially in Japan, like the idea was just straight up rejected. And like even though they kept insisting on it, and at the end they kind of had to walk it back and make it more like ambiguous, which of course just means that Bridget is a man, like it always has been, like he always has been. But like like you can't just have this confused kind of marketing strategy. Like we're at the point now where fans will just straight up ignore these kinds of blatant retcons. Like it's not possible for them to go back and change like the iconic iconography of video games and like completely rewrite history. Like the Vivian thing is a really good example of that because, back in the 2000s, like the entire narrative was that like, oh yeah, like Vivian's a boy. And so like in the Japanese version, so it was very difficult for them to turn it around and try and tell you that like try and gaslight people then like into thinking that like, well, actually he was trans. Like it's like, no, that's not what we were told back then. And honestly, like it's just a video game anyway. So like, if my preferred version of the character is to be taken seriously, like I would say the English version, the original English localization where the character is female, is my preferred version. Like again, like you're talking about a fictional character, like all you're doing is changing a line of dialogue, and it doesn't really, it's not really propagandizing anyone, it's not really making anyone gay, it's not really like, it's just something that activists online tried to use to kind of like push people into their ideology. And that's kind of the purpose of these kind of line changes. And like it has been very uncommon to see that happen in recent years. Like if anything, I think the most effective use of this was back in the 2000s, back with Paper Mario, because if you think about it, like people weren't drawn in by Vivian back in when the Thousand Year Door remake came out. Like they did it back in the 2000s when people played the game, loved it, were attached to the characters, and then people used Vivian to kind of groom people into their ideology. Right? I saw that happen. The bulk of recruitment during that period, the reason why so many Troons are attached to the character now is because of them doing this back then. Like this is not something that came out of nowhere in 2024. Like this was like a 20-year-old like op to like try and like use Vivian to turn kids gay. And like in the end, it just didn't work out all that well. It's just something that's been rejected. People have moved on. And that's my mindset about this. That's my mindset about these kind of localization changes. Like if you're living in a well-adjusted household, with people who actually care about you and have like a perspective on like what is and isn't right, like you will naturally organically reject any wokeness that you come across in your day-to-day life. That is just the reality of the situation we're in. If you have a stable family and community, there is nothing that the entertainment industry can do to kind of gaslight you into thinking their behavior, their worldview is normal. And that's kind of my mindset when it comes to Nintendo of America. Like, even if they go woke, even when they try to make these kind of changes, like they are just unilaterally rejected by everyone. And in an America that's becoming increasingly aware of what these people are, how they operate, and what they've been doing, it is going to become less and less effective, and it is going to become more and more of a red flag. So I think Nintendo of America might be in this position where they are wanting to make changes, but I think they're in a position where even if they tried to do something, it's just going to implode and not work at all. And that's kind of like how I see Doug Bowser is that like he wanted to do things with Nintendo, he wanted it to do certain things. Like I'm sure he might have been behind the whole Shiver being non-binary thing, who knows? Like but like in the end, like he just wasn't allowed to do that. In the end, like nothing really mattered all that much. Everything that they try to do has just kind of collapsed. And it's very possible that in the near future we may see like a course correction for all of these weird localization choices and everything they've done with like the they thems and like all that. Like I am very interested in seeing just like what Nintendo of America does going forward, but I'm not interested in criticizing an executive before they make formal statements on like what they intend to do. And I don't think that Devin Pitchford has enough power or influence to like to radically change the direction of Nintendo of America. Like, I just don't think it's going to happen. I think there's going to be a lot more oversight going forward, and there's going to be a lot more cleaning house. So hopefully, we see a lot more improvements going forward. I see no reason to be apprehensive about the future of Nintendo of America at this stage.